today's webinar on the social and emotional well-being of LGBTIQA+ young people. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri and the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all First Nations people that are attending this webinar. I'm speaking to you today from Naarm, Melbourne. My name is Claire Farrugia. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Senior Research Officer at the Australian Institute of Family Studies. So many LGBTIQA people live happy, healthy, resilient lives. However, a disproportionate number of young people experience worse social, emotional, and health outcomes than their peers. Within a few decades in Australia, we have seen the introduction of marriage equality, and in many areas it is legally and socially unacceptable to discriminate based on sexuality, gender, or sex characteristics. Yet many LGBTI young people continue to have experiences that negatively impact on their social and emotional well-being. So to differing extents, we see that mainstream service providers are working to understand these needs of the diverse groups and respond accordingly. But there continues to be gaps in understanding what the experiences of this group of people are and how best to respond to their needs using evidence and evidence-based practice. So today we are really going to touch on the research, the practice and lived experience, trying to fill these gaps. We will focus on the now what. How today can we improve engagement with LGBTIQ young people and optimise their social and emotional well-being. So a quick note before we begin. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, asexual people are made up of highly diverse groups of people with very distinct experiences. We can't necessarily do justice to their experiences here in this hour, nor can the panel represent the diversity of these experiences. But really the aim today is to start a conversation, to draw attention to some of the overlapping struggles that are faced for young people that are not necessarily heterosexual or in a relationship with a man and a woman, when their gender doesn't align with the sex they were assigned, male or female, usually when they were born, or if they were born with a variation in sex characteristics or identify as part of a broader intersex community. So if you want to know a bit more about the actual acronym itself, please refer to the included resources in the handout section to this webinar. This might be helpful during or after the webinar. And also before we do go into the introducing the presenters, I'd like to acknowledge that some of the content we're discussing today could be triggering and does include some discussions about suicide. So we encourage you all to take it easy and access your support networks and services to debrief after the webinar. So now I'm going to turn to introduce our presenters. Firstly, we have Adam Bourne, who is a bit of a powerhouse and has a long list of titles that include Associate Professor of Public Health and Deputy Director of the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society at La Trobe. He's also a Senior Visiting Fellow at the Kirby Institute at the University of New South Wales. Adam has taken a leading role in the development of research that examines health and well-being of LGBTI people at both domestic and international levels. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's a pleasure to join you today, and thank you to AVES for organising this webinar. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Great, thank you, Adam. So now, oh yeah, okay.
Sorry, no, carry on. Sorry.
I'll introduce Vicky now, who's our next panelist. Vicky Ryle is the Executive Director of Clinical Practice at Headspace, the National Youth Mental Health Foundation. In a career that has spanned over 25 years, Vicky has extensive clinical experience with young people that are also marginalised from mainstream services or difficult to engage and present complex needs. Vicky is a passionate advocate for youth mental health and youth participation. So welcome, Vicky.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Adam. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. And now I'll introduce Nicole Scott. Nicole is an advocate for positive youth mental health education in schools, specifically early education around emotions and how people can be helped with anxiety and depression. In her position as a Headspace Youth National Reference Group member, Nicole wants to inspire and empower young people to seek help and ultimately to see their own power. Nicole identifies as part of the LGBTIQA+ community and is a strong advocate for self-care, who did some painting this morning. I do know that. Welcome, Nicole. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. I think this is a perfect time to turn over to you now, Adam, because we have a lot to get through today. And Adam will be starting by sharing some insights about some of Australia's most recent data on this topic. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much, Claire. So I'd like to use my 10 minutes with you today to talk through the findings of a study that we've recently published called Writing Themselves In For, a national survey of health and well-being among LGBTIQ A+ young people in Australia. As the name suggests, this is the fourth time that we've run such a survey, the first time being conducted way back in 1998. And we've been able to kind of catalogue and understand the experiences of LGBTIQA+ young people over this long period of time. This time around, the survey was conducted in late 2019. So this was all collected pre-COVID, and that's really important, I think, to bear in mind. It recruited young people via a mixture of Instagram and Facebook advertising using a series of different characters and advertisements, such as those shown on the screen before you right now. The survey included a whole range of questions about physical health and well-being, mental health, as well as questions around connection to community, support from family and friends, and experiences that they were having in education. The recruitment for the survey was pretty successful, we think, and it resulted in 6,418 LGBTQA+ young people participating. This makes it the largest ever sample of the population in Australia, and actually one of the largest in the world, so we can speak with real confidence with these data. But more important than it being large, though, it's also really diverse. We heard from large samples of young people in rural areas, people from culturally diverse backgrounds, those living with disability, and a really diverse range of voices across the spectrum of gender identity and sexuality. And all of those characteristics and those intersections, they all matter. We're a strong community with a rich and shared history, but we're also as diverse as any other population, and we can't lose sight of that diversity when we're designing programs or planning services. Obviously, the focus here today is on mental health and on the experiences young people told us and relating to suicidality. And I guess I want to be really upfront about this. The figures that I'm about to discuss are pretty confronting. They tell a story of young people in some exceptionally challenging circumstances. And to be honest, no matter how many times I or the rest of my team look at or talk about these data, they're still really affecting. And so, as Claire said at the start, do take a moment afterwards to reflect upon them and to reach out to support, to debrief if you need to. As a starting point, we use the K10 scale, a really commonly used mental health screening tool to establish psychological distress among participants. 81% of participants displayed signs of high or very high psychological distress. This was even higher among young people living with a disability, those who are trans or gender diverse, or those living in rural areas. Now, that figure of 81% is at least 4 times higher than what we observe in assessments made of young people in the general population. Of serious and particular concern was our finding that 1 in 4 of the young people, LGBT young people we surveyed, had attempted suicide at some point in their lives. That's 1 in 4, 25.6% had attempted suicide at some point. 1 in 10 LGBTQA+ young people had attempted suicide in the last 12 months. And this is a rate at least 3 times higher than what we observe in studies of young people in the general population. And as high as these figures are to begin with, they're even higher still among certain groups. The experience of attempting suicide was even more common among those aged 14 to 17 compared to those aged 20 to 21, which perhaps indicates the particular exposure to harm among school-aged young people and those who are more likely to still be living at home, perhaps with families who aren't understanding or supportive of their sexuality or gender identity. And much more common also among those who were trans or gender diverse, where we saw 1 in 6, 16.4%, had attempted suicide in the last 12 months. 1 in 7 young people living in rural or remote areas had attempted suicide in the last 12 months, nearly twice as high as the proportion who were living in capital cities who had that experience. And it was similar patterns that were also observed for people with disability as well. As you reflect on those mental health statistics and how striking as they are, it's absolutely essential that you hold in your mind the kind of environment that many LGBTQA+ young people still inhabit. More than 40% of them told us that they'd experienced verbal harassment specifically relating to their sexuality or gender identity in the last 12 months. More than 22% said they'd experienced sexual harassment or assault, and 9.7% had experienced physical harassment or assault in the last 12 months. And all of these figures were much higher for participants who were trans or gender diverse. In recent analyses we've been performing, all of these experiences are really highly associated with poor mental health outcomes. Those who had experienced verbal, physical, or sexual harassment or assault were at least twice as likely, and sometimes 3 times as likely, to have recently attempted suicide compared to those who hadn't had one of these experiences. And this challenge around harassment and abuse and the notion of safety really is particularly evident in educational settings, at schools, at TAFEs, or at universities. And these have been sites of lots of work over the last decade, but also the sites of much debate. The data from Writing Themselves in 4 tell us that there's still a great deal of work ahead of us. More than 60% of those at secondary school told us they felt unsafe or uncomfortable in the past 12 months because of their sexuality or gender identity and how they were treated by others. And although the proportion was lower, it was still the case that 1 in 3 young people at TAFE and 29% of those at university reported that similar experience of feeling unsafe. Nearly 2/3 reported frequently hearing negative remarks regarding sexuality at their school in the last 12 months. And these kinds of experiences were all much more common among those living in rural and remote locations. None of these experiences relating to safety or harassment, if they're happening at home, in school, or in any other context, none of them are historic. They're all things that happened in the last 12 months. They aren't experiences that have been banished to the dim and distant past, where perhaps we thought there was greater visibility of homophobia and transphobia. These experiences of stigma and violence have been real, and they've been very recent. They tell us just how far we have to go in tackling the upstream drivers of mental health, and what we have to do to tackle homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and any other hostility directed towards LGBTQA+ young people. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that everything in the lives of these young people is cast by a shadow. And alongside those stories of significant mental health challenges, we also heard about the creativity and passion of LGBTQA+ young people and the things that are helping to make them feel safe. We didn't ask many open-ended questions in the survey, but towards the end, we did ask participants, what makes you feel good about yourself? And these are some of the most remarkable data in the whole report. The findings speak to how they find meaningful connection to others, how being affirmed by others in their gender or sexuality can be the most rewarding experience of all, and how they find ways to express their individuality that make them feel confident and empowered. They talked about the creative outlets that they found, the relationships that mattered to them, and the positive changes they tried to bring about for their community. If we want to try and improve health and well-being for LGBTQA+ young people, then these are the kinds of strengths and values that we can draw upon. And finally, I guess we've been talking about mental health among this population for years. And I wanted to underscore the fact that these findings I've shown you are not necessarily new. They replicate those found in several other studies conducted previously, but they tell the story with a larger and more diverse sample than we've ever had before. And studies like this help us to amplify the voices of LGBTQA+ young people and encourage us to stand up and take action. In the national report, we make 21 different recommendations for actions, including targeted mental health interventions and scale up of funding for LGBTI communities, national networks and forums for sharing of emerging good practice, and clearer expectations placed on mental health services to ensure that they're safe and affirming of LGBTQA+ young people so that they can get the help that they need if and when they reach out. And I encourage everyone to have a read of those recommendations in the report. Finally, I just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone who makes this kind of project possible. It was funded by the Victorian Department for Premier and Cabinet, the New South Wales Department of Health, the Australian Capital Territory Office for LGBTIQ+ Affairs, and Shine SA, with support from Office of the Chief Psychiatrist in South Australia. And it won't surprise you to know that a very large team of people is required to make a project like this happen. My thanks to the colleagues within the centre, as well as a really passionate and expert community stakeholder group and the youth advisory group who really did make sure this was attentive to the needs of LGBTIQ+ young people. So thank you for your attention. Thanks to AIFS for convening this panel on what is such an important topic. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Vicky Ryle from Headspace. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Adam. I've read Writing Themselves In Again each iteration, and each time it is a sobering reminder of how far we have to go, and you kind of keep hoping that each time it comes out again that things will be better. And I guess in some instances, in some ways they are, and in many others for our community, that's not necessarily the case. I want to start by acknowledging the lands that I'm on. I'm the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to cultures, identity, connections to waters, kin and community. In particular, Headspace is really committed to making a positive contribution in the lives of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in providing services that are safe, welcoming and inclusive. I particularly today call out elders in the LGBTIQA+ community, and likewise acknowledge that myself and hundreds of other people across Headspace have sought to try really hard to make sure our services are safe and welcoming. And we will always have a lot of improvements to make in that going forward. I'm going to start fairly big and end up with sort of day-to-day practice. I hope that's useful. I'm going to talk about the Headspace brand, which not brand for brand's sake, but Headspace started in 2006. We've had a national youth reference group like the one that Nicole's in. Nicole's, I think, in the 8th or 9th iteration of that, and everything that we have done over time, including the brand, has been built with young people. The young man on this image I know very well because he has helped shape everything that we do. So everything you're about to see from a brand perspective, and this is the sort of description of our brand. And the reason I think this is really important in a space like making services inclusive is young people have continually told us that we need to make sure Headspace for us and other services for other people represents itself as for young people, by young people, delivering evidence-based care and working alongside young people. And that I think is particularly important for our LGBTIQA+ young people. As you will see when I'm coming down to sort of service-based recommendations, it starts to become very clear that the way that we create services and brand also has to speak to young people to give them the message that you are welcome here. I can see myself represented. We are obviously all about making sure young people are mentally healthy and engaged in their communities. Mental health is not a fixed state. It's something that we all need to kind of learn to manage. Like your physical health, it will wax and wane. It feels important to say that, particularly on the back of what Adam was talking about. The reason that LGBTI QA+ young people are overrepresented in mental health statistics is because of their experiences, and because they have unsafe experiences and in many instances are not welcomed. So again, you'll see through the organisation and practice recommendations, what we're seeking to do is change that, is give all young people a positive experience of help seeking. And I'm going to go through some high-level service statistics. Currently, there are 137 Headspace centres across the country. Some of them are sort of smaller centres, they're called satellites. And this is a mean, so it's an average. But what you can see here is that on average, we see 62% people that identify as female and 36% identify as male and 2% in the gender diverse group, or haven't been comfortable to answer that question. Nationally, the mean is 24% of those nearly 100,000 young people last year identified as LGBTIQA+. Now, if you look at a modal distribution, some centres are seeing as high as 50% of their young people. So remember, 137 centres, this is a national average. So it means that some centres are seeing a lot more LGBTIQA+ young people, and certainly a lot more than any research will tell us proportionately that young people identify as. It usually comes out, Adam's going to be better at this than I am, but around 10, and I've seen things up to sort of 20% rather. But we're seeing much higher numbers than population averages. The same in culturally and linguistically diverse, the same with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people, which also makes sense because each of those groups are overrepresented in poorer mental health. So it's sort of what you would want to see, if you see what I'm saying, that we want people who are struggling to be able to access our services, and it looks like that's what's happening. We also have a national online telephone service. It's called eHeadspace. It's accessed through the Headspace website. And there's a bigger gender skew you can see there. These gender patterns, by the way, are not uncommon in a lot of help-seeking services. It's something we need to continue to work to redress, making young men feel more comfortable to access help. But you can see that in eHeadspace, the LGBTIQA+ numbers go up to 30%. And again, that's an annual average across 32,000 young people in a single year. So the long and the short of that is we're seeing a lot of young people nationally, and we are seeing a lot of young people who identify as part of our LGBTIQA+ community. I'm not trying to say here at all that we have it right. I have the responsibility of clinical governance across the network, and we still get some complaints. young people being misgendered or feeling like they didn't have a great experience. And I guess these are all things that we keep trying to improve our services from. Every March, Headspace do a campaign. It's called Life is Not Always Rainbow and Glitter. I think I've got that right. And sorry, that went backwards there. Each year, the contributors to that campaign are young people from our national reference group. So these three young people, I imagine, are known well to Nicole. And it's a digital campaign, so it's going out through all our social medium. And we also attend Pride marches, Mardi Gras and Pride all around the country, and all the assets, so the digital assets and videos, etc., that we produce are used to support that campaign. And I'm going to go now to showing you a video.
Pronouns are the words that we use in place of somebody's name. Pronouns are a way of referring to oneself. He, she. Sometimes people might not feel comfortable with either of those pronouns, and so they might use the gender neutral they and them. But it can go a long way in terms of making somebody feel comfortable and feel accepted by you. I think language is really important to members of the LGBTIQA+ community because it really gives us a sense of belonging. We've got this kind of really beautiful and fluid community where things keep changing and identities kind of keep growing as people discover that you don't have to fit into the boxes that you've necessarily been provided all your life. The way that we speak about members of the LGBTQIA+ community and the language that we use is really important in terms of, I guess, first and foremost, conveying respect. It's who they are all the time. It's when you're getting a coffee, it's when you're going down the street, it's when you're booking a hotel, it's whatever. And it's really important to ask about it. What are your pronouns? It's okay to do that. It's better than assume. Have a Google, suss it out, educate yourself.
Thank you. Look, that was an example of a video that we worked with some young people on creating. It was actually in response to, we'd had a couple of complaints come to us across the network around young people who are being misgendered. And we talked to some young people about what might be a really accessible way to teach people about how to make services more inclusive and identify pronouns. And so we got these badges, which you can't probably see, which all of the staff at Headspace National wear, and we encourage all the centre staff to wear to identify their pronoun and help people have open conversations about use of pronouns. I'll move on. I've talked a lot about really the key thing for Headspace in being LGBTI inclusive is being led by the voices of young people. This is our incredible group of young people. You can try and pick Nicole in this group if you want to. She looks a bit different now. But we employ as casual staff a group of about 20 young people. They're usually with us for 18 months to 2 years. This current group have been with us a bit longer because last year was extraordinary. They're from all over Australia, all sorts of different experiences, and they help us make sure that everything we're doing is safe. In terms of guidance, practical guidance for organisations, I'm hoping this is all fairly self-evident from what I've been saying, but offering a space that is accepting, and that's using rainbow or trans rainbow flags, inclusive imagery, developing partners with LGBTI services in the community where they exist, and obviously we know that that's not in some regional areas that can be a problem. Providing training for staff to make sure that they feel confident and competent in supporting or adapting their care for LGBTIQA+ young people. Most of the products that Headspace National provide will use inclusive language, so forms, data collection. I mean, it really is thinking about every single contact a young person has with your service and making sure that there's nothing in that that's going to alienate them or not allow them to express their identity the way that they would choose to. I mean, it is in the evidence for LGBTIQA+ organisation inclusion to employ people that identify. I've personally never needed to kind of come out in a one-on-one session with a young person, which is not to say that I wouldn't. So it's more about, I think, having people that understand the experience and will build the inclusivity of the service rather than a one-on-one talking about it, if that makes any sense. And I guess it is inclusive language around any conversations around gender and sexuality and engagement. We've also, Headspace works with people between the ages of 12 and 25. A lot of the organisations' services need to be mindful that some young people may want to come and talk to a Headspace clinician about their gender or sexuality, but they may or may not have actually spoken with their family member or support person about that as yet. So there's a whole lot of factors that we need to be mindful of and inclusive of, but being sensitive to their experiences after that. I guess what this is really trying to say is open conversations, ask about identity, ask about sexuality, ask how that is for young people. Through my career, which is long now, that those answers have really changed in some respects. Lots of people in the LGB identifying with those labels feel like that's not necessarily a difficulty or why they're there, but as Adam said, very ably talked about, it may be much more about other experiences they've had that relate to that, but their experience of help seeking needs to affirm their identity, and they need to feel so sex education, for example, in schools or as part of good mental health care, needs to talk about safe sex practices for all sexualities, all identities. So I guess the last slide here is just building social supports. As Adam said, many, I mean, we did a survey of the Headspace Network not that long ago, and over 50% of them, without us saying that this has to happen or anything, but just driven by the young people, have created a social group, a rainbow social group or LGBTI. They're called all sorts of different things across the country. And as Adam's research suggests, we know that young people get a lot from talking to other young people who identify as part of this group and do get that support and acceptance. And as I said, we know that we haven't got it all right, and we're certainly happy to hear suggestions and continual improvements by young people. And that's it for me, and I'm going to introduce Nicole.
Thanks, Vicky. Cool. So my name is Nicole, obviously. My pronouns are she and her. First off, I just really want to thank everyone for coming along to this and giving me space to share my story and share really tangible tips that practitioners can do to create a more inclusive space. So first off, I'm just going to do a little bit of a lived experience about my personal journey. And I really want to emphasize that my personal journey does not reflect everyone's experience. We're such a diverse group, and we definitely can't explore everyone's experience just in this 1 hour. So I have lived experience of depression and anxiety. I started experiencing those around the age of 14. When I was a lot younger, I started to think about who I was attracted to and my identity, my sexuality. But for me personally, me needing to seek help for my mental health, it wasn't actually linked to my identity or my sexuality, which I think is a really important thing to just point out. For some people it is. Some people have really bad experiences and that can affect their mental well-being. But for me personally, it actually didn't have anything to do with that. And I was really lucky. I had really amazing experiences, mostly with practitioners, and I never felt like I had to come out or talk about my sexuality. But there was a few things that some practitioners did that just helped me to feel really safe. And if I wanted to have that conversation, I felt like I could, and that I was in a safe space, and that, yeah, if I wanted to share, it would be okay. So I think the one thing that was really important for me, and still is, and I think it is for anyone in the LGBTQI+ community, is a sense of belonging, a sense of community. A lot of us, we don't have super supportive family, and we really need that sense of connection, like all people do. But for us, because we might not always have super supportive people around us, that is even more important. And so there's some really simple ways that practitioners can do this. And some Vicky mentioned. So one of the things that I really love seeing is when practitioners have their badge, but then they'll also have their pronouns on there. And it's not necessarily that I need my pronouns to show people, but when practitioners have that, I'm like, oh, that they're okay with this conversation. This must be a safe space. This is okay. I can come out and show my pronouns if I want to. And so it just creates that sense of safety, and you're okay, you're seen, you're heard. And also having that on forms, so saying preferred pronouns on the form. And it's just having that opportunity and seeing that people are ready to have that conversation. It's almost like, oh, okay, I'm okay here. This is going to be okay. And having posters, I've seen posters around that say, you are welcome here, or you are loved. I really love those ones. And when sometimes people feel like it can be overwhelming if they don't know much about sexual identity and gender identity. And it can feel a bit overwhelming. It's like, oh, what do I do? How do I start these conversations? But what it comes down to is, at least for me, it was the practitioner seeing me as a person. The practitioner actually wanting to understand me, wanting to know about me. The services that I went to, and I felt like a person. I felt like I was being seen. I felt like all of me was being seen, and that was mainly through building trust and rapport that just helped me feel so much more safe, and that sense of belonging and sense of community. So it can be really, really simple, small steps that practitioners can do. And I can understand that it can feel a little bit confronting, or maybe a little bit uncomfortable to start to have the conversation around pronouns. It might be your first time hearing about pronouns today. But the thing is, we need to have these conversations. You might feel a little bit uncomfortable about, oh, how do I ask this person about their pronouns? How are they going to react? But I can guarantee you we are more afraid. And what I mean by that is, we're not afraid to talk about our pronouns, but we are afraid, oh, what if I get rejected? What if this person says something that's really from a hateful place? Or until we know that we are welcome, at least for me, going into a new environment, I'm like, okay, I need to hide myself a little bit. I need to pull back. And I think that's really sad, especially for young people. Like, I'm 26. Can you imagine what maybe a 14-year-old feels? Or just being able to start to have those conversations. And if I really encourage you to practice. So start saying when you meet people and when in your workplace, my name's Nicole, my pronouns are she and her, what's yours? And it's just as simple as that. It can be really, really simple, and just practice. If you need to practice at home with like a trusted person first, just because it feels a little bit uncomfortable, it's okay. It's okay for these conversations to feel uncomfortable at first. We're not used to them. So it's really getting that practice in so that we can start to normalize pronouns and normalize talking about sexuality and identity, because there is a little bit of stigma around it still, unfortunately. And so the last thing I really want to jump into is the importance of participation. So I'm part of the Headspace Youth National Group, and that helped me so much on a personal level. Knowing that I am in a safe space, my opinions and my experiences are being heard, and that is what Headspace is taking on, and they're improving their services from that. If you are from a service and you don't have the voice of young people improving your practice, it's something you need to do. Honestly, it's so important for us to feel heard and seen, and you'll get a lot better outcomes with the young people as well. And I think there was something mentioned, I think it was from Vicky, for young people by young people, and it's really, really important that we hear that. And then also you're getting education straight from people who are living it. So it's not just improving your own practice, but it's also improving your own education, your own understanding. But I also really recommend getting training for your practitioners, professional training, going to little things like this. It's absolutely amazing. It really shows how committed you are to learning and wanting to create that safe space for us. So yeah, I think that's the main tips I wanted to go through, but we are going to go through some questions that you've sent through. We'll also have a recording of other questions. So I'm really looking forward to that, and hopefully we can cover everything that you want us to go through.
Great. Thank you very, very much, all of you. That was an incredibly insightful overview of what I guess we've been talking about. I think on the one hand, devastating. And I think particularly when we look at, you know, the kind of rates around assault and harassment, and really shows how high the stakes are when we then turn to look at that suicide data. And also, in some ways, what we've gone through today and what you touched on, Nicole, was also insightful, but also simple in a lot of ways. The ways that being person-centered, being strength-based, you know, approaches we would have with other clients, how powerful they are for creating welcoming, safe, kind of comfortable environments, including not making assumptions, I guess, that this person automatically has boyfriend or girlfriend or is automatically that gender because way they're presenting. So these are incredibly important insights, and we have a lot of questions and only a short amount of time. So if it's good with everyone, I'll dive straight in. We've already touched on this through the conversation, but one of those questions is around particularly what can be done about promoting healthy conversations about LGBTI young people who feel to feel welcome and safe in school. Nicole, would you like to start on that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure specifically around conversations, but around something that kind of leads to that is creating the school into a safe space. And so really, I think it would be really amazing if teachers were able to have their pronouns on them, really starting with that normalizing conversation of pronouns, making sure that the school is getting appropriate training, and also just having like posters and other sorts of flyers around, just really showing that you are, as a school, wanting to create that safe space, and you are wanting to open up those conversations.
Adam or Vicky, feel free to jump in at any point.
Those are all great points from Nicole, Claire. The only perhaps the thing I'd add is just the importance of having, in the first place, clear and responsive anti-bullying and inclusion policies around LGBTIQ, but also making sure that all of the students know they exist and understand the principles of them. So in our recent analysis, we've seen that people who were aware of and familiar with an LGBTIQ bullying policy within their school were 35% less likely to have high levels of psychological distress than those who didn't have that knowledge and awareness. And that just says something I think about. I recognize this as a school that has thought about me, that understands me, and has laid out what they will do in the circumstances where I am not treated with dignity and respect, and where I'm not made to feel safe in my school environment. So I think it's not just the existence, but people need to know it's there, and they need to know how to use that policy to kind of help craft that safe environment.
Great. Vicky, are you happy if I move to the next question, or do you? Yeah, great. Well, we have a number of questions that I guess touch on the real differences in experience for different communities. So one of those questions is, how does the panel think we can best support LGBTI young people from multicultural or multi-faith backgrounds, particularly given that there could be added cultural complexities? And I'm interested to see if any of the data also, Adam, brought that out.
Yeah, sure. So in the national report for writing themselves in, which perhaps we can put in the chat box so people can link to it easily as well, there's a series of chapters at the end that break down those responses around suicide, psychological distress, a range of other issues by ethnicity, by where you're living in different parts of the country, by whether or not you have a disability. And in relation to the ethnicity data, you see really quite stark differences between those who identify as Anglo-Celtic versus those, particularly those from Chinese, Southeast Asian or Indian backgrounds. And I think a kind of really particular thing to bear in mind is the much lower proportion of people from Chinese and Southeast Asian backgrounds, for example, who feel supported by their family and by their friends in relation to their gender identity or sexuality. And I think while we're thinking about and planning and furthering interventions in schools and in other kinds of services, you know, we need to remember the really key and important role that families play within this as well, and think creatively in partnership with organizations that work on behalf of culturally and linguistically diverse groups. It has to be in partnership with them. It's important that we think creatively about what those kinds of family-related interventions might look like and how we can support families in culturally diverse backgrounds to perhaps often just better understand the nature and complexity of sexuality and gender identity, so that they're more empowered and understanding, you know, at said time when they're you know, when one of their children identifies as part of the LGBT community.
Yeah, I guess, and also, you know, Nicole, you spoke to the importance of community, but of course we have multiple communities in our life and multiple belongings. And so particularly from people, migrant, refugee backgrounds, those belongings are very important. So thank you for that, Adam. I wonder, Vicky, I know we've had this throughout, but what would be your key takeaways? We've got a question on what are some of the things a service has to do to ensure LGBTI young people feel welcome and safe? And so I wondered if you could just like pinpoint a couple of your key things.
I mean, I think Nicole reiterated it really well, that front and center is involving young people. It's almost like, I mean, what you want to do is, I mean, I think things like rainbow tick accreditation are really useful as a gap analysis of what services are missing. They do pick up really practical things, but safe, inclusive imagery, safe, inclusive at every level, the forms, the receptionists are key in any support service. You know, I think asking young people to critique your service, it will always, you know, highlight more things than I possibly can.
Yeah, great. And by inclusive imagery, we also mean imagery of the rainbow or trans flag, or like, is there any other,
Yeah.
like Nicole, from your experience going in somewhere, is there anything else that you think is key for services to kind of use to flag to LGBTIQ communities?
Yeah, I think definitely badges with pronouns on them is really key.
On that note, there also has been a, oh yeah, go Adam.
Oh, sorry, just a quick one. I was just going to say,
Yeah.
and also thinking, I mean, I'm a researcher, I always geek out about data, but thinking about the kinds of questions you ask in intake forms, there can be nothing more confronting at times where a young person comes into your service and you present them with an option saying, are you male or female? Or worse, even when you say male, female, or other, which immediately makes you feel somewhat very, very different. There is some really good guidance that's been recently published by the ABS on how you can effectively and ethically ask questions around gender identity and sexuality. Think about how you can adopt those within your intake forms within all of your services.
Yeah, fantastic. Especially those ABS guidelines are particularly useful. On that note, also of pronoun badges, we do have a question, Vicky, if it's possible to view the Headspace badge itself online. I wonder if there's people looking for some sort of template.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can show it to you this old-fashioned way.
Excellent. Old-fashioned's good.
Oh, hang on. I've actually got a whole collection, but yeah, I'll send Claire a photograph of each of them. But there is
thank you.
Yeah,
there's Adam's out. Excellent.
And -18 have some as well that we used to have before we had our own made.
Yeah, great.
I think you can get them for free.
Great. I think before, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and there also is a particular interest in the last period of COVID and the COVID restrictions. Has there been particular social and emotional concerns during this time? And has there been any research done so far? So I'll open that to all of you, but I know, Nicole, you also have been doing some work around that as well at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. So just from my own personal experience, yeah, it does affect young people a lot, especially in the community, because a lot of us don't have safe spaces at home. So when we're restricted, there's no safe space for us. So that can really negatively impact our mental health and our well-being. And yeah, I've been hearing that from my friends as well. It can be really damaging.
I think that's a really great point from Nicole. An awful lot of people finding themselves having to go often back to families of origin, to birth families, where during lockdown, where they may not necessarily have been supported in relation to their sexuality or gender identity, and that being really problematic. And we've certainly heard about that in some recent research we've been doing here in Melbourne that was actually collecting data during lockdown. And I mean, I guess just overall, you know, the community went into the pandemic where our mental health was, to be blunt, far worse than the vast majority of other people. Like, we were in a more vulnerable position when we entered into this. It's hard to find anyone, gay, straight, cisgender, or trans or gender diverse whose mental health wasn't impacted in some way by COVID-19. And I guess I'm just saying, think about that when you're already starting from a pretty challenging or vulnerable position, I guess.
Yeah, so Headspace did a piece of research which we can give to ACE to distribute, but it essentially shows, it looked at the mental health experience in the first lockdown like sort of March, April last year, that was published in about May, and it really showed that people did feel like their mental health got worse, and that it cuts it up into sort of what was impacted: work, relationships, etc. And the report sort of concludes that the people with existing mental health problems, their problems got worse, and those without also were affected. So, you know, it affected everybody, which is not really news. But it didn't the report doesn't specifically analyse in terms of LGBTIQA+, but they do note that the respondents were overrepresentative in LGBTI. So I guess you can feel like it accurately speaks to the experiences of that community. And I think the other thing we can, it's really important in things like pandemics and natural disasters to remember there are some positive outcomes. So young people talked about new habits, improving some habits in the home, that kind of thing, some more downtime. That's covered in the report as well. That's a common occurrence with natural disasters, as sort of a silver lining. But the other thing is it is reasonable to anticipate that the mental health impact of COVID, and like other natural disasters, is fairly long lasting. They're talking about 3 to 5 years. I don't know, Adam, if you know that research space, but it's suggesting that because we had floods, fires, etc., there's also a cumulative effect, and that in the natural disaster literature, there's sort of we were in multiple phases at once, sort of response, recovery, etc. So there will be a likely an even longer tail of mental health impact on young people.
Thanks for that, Vicky. I guess we also know, we don't have clear kind of stats at the moment, but we know that family violence during this period of time has also risen. And I wonder, we've had a few questions about family violence for LGBTI young people, and if they are more likely or at higher risk for facing family violence when they're coming out about their sexuality. I wonder if I can pose that question.
I mean, the answer is yes. Unfortunately, we certainly know that a lot of young, I mean, there's data in writing themselves in that talks about experiences of violence that occur within the home. So verbal, physical, and sexual harassment or assault that occurs within the home, and it documents who the perpetrator of that was. And it is the case, unfortunately, that there are still, I mean, any number is unacceptable. And there's still a sizable proportion of young people who are who are in receipt of abuse in the home from family members who are not accepting or tolerant of their gender identity and sexuality. And I think it's insightful when you look at the data around experience of homelessness. And about 1 in 5 young people had experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. About 1 in 10% had that experience in the last 12 months. And when we asked them kind of what were some of the factors that influenced or led to your experience of homelessness, really, really high on that list was rejection from family at the point at which they disclosed. So yes, unfortunately, Kate, that's Claire, that's still a really common experience.
And how best do you include families that have potentially have resistance, or how do you include them at all for LGBTI young people? Nicole, is that something that I think we've talked a tiny bit about?
Yeah, I think the really important key is to let the young person choose that, choose when, if ever, and in what ways that they would like that. It's really important to hear the young person's voice in that to avoid further damage.
And I'm a massive advocate for family inclusion in the care of young people from a mental health perspective. And I think the default should always be that the families should be included. But how that's done, in particular in relation to LGBTIQA+ young people who may not be out to their families, is critical. And similarly with young people who are from refugee and migrant backgrounds or culturally and linguistically diverse, we have an interesting sort of generational, or we're at a point where young people at the moment are more literate from a mental health perspective than they perhaps have ever been, more inclusive from a gender and sexuality perspective than they perhaps have ever been. But that is not necessarily the case for their parents. And that literacy is exacerbated even more with culturally and linguistically diverse or refugee and migrant populations. So there are sensitive ways to just have really frank conversations with young people about it is often young people have better outcomes when their families are included, but we need to be really careful about doing that in a way that feels okay for you. What can we talk about together with the family? What can't we talk about? And certainly I have many instances of where families have wanted us to, almost do conversion therapy, seeing both people separate, ending up coming together with a, not necessarily a celebration outcome, but I guess an acceptance and having had some extent of the conversation that is as far as that's going to go. It's very, it takes a lot of time and relationship building with both ends, in my experience, and quite a lot of confidence as a clinician that because like if I'm working with Nicole, she needs to know and trust that I can and will respect everything she's going to say to me, and that I can do that something similar with Nicole's family, but not necessarily move information between that's not going to be helpful. But I think it can be done. I mean, I know it can be done. I've done it myself. I think the difficulty is, a lot of certainly young clinicians don't have heaps of confidence in family work, generally speaking, and so I think that is a challenge. But I think do some training, get some supervision, and have a go, and be guided by the young person.
Yeah, and is there a particular, I guess, additional barriers that we see for young people in rural and remote Australia? Adam touched on this, but I did wonder, Nicole, if there's any particular, differences that you saw being in regional Victoria from access, like when it comes to access to community or other aspects that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously with COVID and restrictions, it was a lot harder, but just in general as well, I think people sometimes assume if you're in a regional area that you have access to internet and that kind of thing, and I actually didn't. So that was something we had to try and work around when COVID hit and I was at uni. But also, yeah, for people who don't have that access to internet, what can you do and how can you support them too? And obviously when there aren't restrictions, the importance of having both in-person and online services and having that option for young people is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any particular online, we've also had a question about resources that people think are useful, online resources that people can access. I guess we can include a number of these in the event description, but I'm wondering if there's any other resources that people want to throw off on the top of their head as well that practitioners can look up when they listen to this.
Static resources, you mean, Claire, like fact sheets and stuff?
Yeah, or online community. I don't know if there's communities of practice.
Yeah, I think Mental Health Professionals Network, I think, has a LGBTI interest group. Like there's quite a few. It depends. There's also online, like there's a Q Headspace. So there's some online communities for young people talking about, a whole range of things. So it kind of depends on, I can send you through a few different things for each audience.
And there's -18 and other youth groups as well, so people can also be different state-based specialist services as well.
We usually use the stuff from Adam's work first and foremost. So
I'm glad someone's reading it, Vicky.
Yeah, no, we've but we also do. I mean, it's also people like, I know it's Jamie, one of Adam's colleagues, does sort of a supportive conversation for lots of the Headspace staff, for example. I mean, that sort of mentoring, if you like, I just think that's, people need an ongoing conversation and somewhere safe to take it. I don't know if there is anything like that for others, but I mean, I just know that lots of the centres really value the Victorian centres, because a lot of the other states and territories don't have as good LGBTI kind of services. Probably something we should start a community of practice, really.
Or hopefully inspire people to start after today. So I think we do have to finish in a minute, but I do want to ask Adam also, we've had questions about whether there's particular data on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities that have come out. And I am aware that we don't have representation today here in the panel, and it is a real topic that we need to explore further. So I did want to end with, do you have any kind of insights that we could bring to the audience?
Yeah, so for the time being, well, I'll start by saying we were really fortunate to engage quite a relatively large number of LGBTIQ people who were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in the survey. So in total, there were 256, that's about 4% of the sample, which to our knowledge is the largest ever survey of LGBTIQA+ Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, young or adult. It's like still the largest sample. And I think it's really incumbent upon us to work with those data sensitively and ethically and in partnership with Aboriginal organisations. So what we're doing at the moment is working through a process of ethics approvals with different Aboriginal controlled ethics boards, and forming a partnership of Aboriginal organisations in each state and territory to come together to help us look at the data, to interpret them and understand them, to situate them within Aboriginal bodies of knowledge. And hopefully then the output of that, perhaps a little bit later in the year, will be a dedicated report that just talks about the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTIQ people. We're going to couple that. We did an adult survey recently as well, called Private Lives of LGBTIQ Adults. So we're going to merge together these two different samples and then hopefully write a report that talks across them. And in doing so provides a really, really large, rich data set about Aboriginal experiences of the form we've not really had before. I can tell you from having just eyeballed the data and kind of had a look at it thus far, that it is really troubling, that there's a lot in there. There's going to be a lot for us to reckon with, and there's going to have to be a lot of soul searching about how we can best move forward with this in the near future.
Great. I think this is a great place to end today's conversation. Again, thank you very much, and we will be staying tuned for that future research, Adam, and for hopefully more future partnerships and talks on this conversation. So thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great.